Good morning, class. So today we are going to be talking about how we can identify the perspective of the storyteller within a book. All right, so this is a really, really important thing to learn. Even as Christians, this is a really important thing to know how to do. Actually, within Scripture, it says that fools find no pleasure in understanding, but they delight in airing out their own opinions. So not seeking to understand others and their differing perspectives is a really foolish choice to make, because sometimes it could blind us from seeing the truth in other people's perspectives. Like, can you imagine if you never sought out Christ's perspective through reading Scripture? So it's really, really important to try to seek out other perspectives, but also to know whose perspective that you're listening to. So how is everybody's morning? All right. So I'm actually going to tell you a quick story about one morning that I had. So every summer, my family, we'd love to go camping, and it's usually a really fun time. But one summer, it was not very fun. I woke up to the sound of a bear growling right outside my tent, and I was freaking out. I thought I was about to be a bear's breakfast, and eventually went away and everything was okay, but I was still a little bit shaken up, so I went to my brothers to talk about it. And do you know what they told me? They told me that morning they had decided to play a prank on me, and so they had grabbed a speaker and they were playing bear noises on it outside of my tent. So that was the story of the same morning, but it was so different because it was told from different perspectives. So my story was really, really scary because my perspective was different, while my brother's story was really, really funny because in their perspective, they knew that there was no bear and it was just a joke. But do you see how the same morning can be so different depending on whose perspective the story is being told from? So that's part of why it's really important to know who the storyteller is, because it can really change the entire story. So just a quick review. Perspective is the way that someone might see or think about something. It's possible for two people to see the same thing but think differently about it, just like the camping story between me and my brothers, because they are both seeing the situation through their own perspectives. And then a storyteller is somebody who makes telling a story fun or interesting by adding in their own experience or creativity into a story. And I'm actually going to give you guys a little hint. Actually, this is a pretty big hint on how to know who the storyteller within a story is. And we actually, we do this by paying attention to the words that are used, okay? So within a story, if we see words like I, me, or my being used, it means that the storyteller is talking about themselves, okay? And then within a story, if we see words like he, she, his, hers, and theirs, those are being used when we're talking about someone else. And so those are words that the storyteller will use when they're talking about other people and not themselves. All right, so actually within this point of the lesson, I would show the students like a video telling the story of the Three Little Pigs, because they kind of need that prior knowledge for the rest of the lesson. But yes, so I'm just gonna cut that out for time's sake, but just know that like that would have normally happened. All right, class, so today we will be reading a book called The True Story of the Three Little Pigs. But first, does anybody have a guess of who might be telling the story of this book? And does anybody want to guess how the story might be different from the original story that we just told? All right. And then I'll begin the book. So, everybody knows the story of the Three Little Pigs, or at least they think that they do. But I'll let you in on a little secret. Nobody knows the real story, because nobody has ever heard my side of the story. All right, so even within that first page, we are seeing the word my being used. So that kind of makes me think that I think the narrator is talking about himself. So the story is being told from his perspective. But let's see if we can figure out who the narrator is. All right? Way back in Once Upon a Time, I was making a birthday cake for my dear old granny. I had a terrible sneezing cold, and I was out of sugar. So we keep seeing the word I being used. I was making my grandma a birthday cake. I had a terrible teasing cold. I was out of sugar. So that makes me think, once again, the narrator is talking about himself. And when we look at the images used within the story, it is a wolf baking a cake. And right here it says, I was making a birthday cake. So because the picture matches up with the text, we know that the main character and the narrator is a wolf. All right? Let's see. So the next page says, I walked down the street to ask my neighbor for a cup of sugar. Now, this neighbor was a pig, and he wasn't too bright either. He had built his whole house out of straw. Can you believe it? I mean, who in his right mind would build a house out of straw? All right, so within this page, when we're talking about the pig, we see words used like he wasn't too bright either. He had built his whole house out of straw. And so, because we are seeing words like he and his, we know that the story isn't from the pig's perspective, because those words are used when you're talking about someone else. But again, the wolf, when we're talking about the wolf, we see words like, so I walked down the street to ask my neighbor for a cup of sugar. And these words reinforce that, yes, the narrator is talking about himself, and the picture reinforces that the narrator is a wolf. All right. And so I would continue to do that for the rest of the story, and then I would lead the students in kind of a discussion. And so some of the questions that I would ask is, are these words that you would usually use when talking about other people or talking about yourself? So I would pause and have like students kind of like practice that knowledge again. And let's see. So again, after the story, I would talk about which character told the story and how do we know? So then that would give the students, and then I would have them talk amongst groups, and that would give the students an opportunity to talk about the different words and the pictures and how we talked about those. And how was this story different when told from the pig's perspective? And so they could talk about how the storyteller and the perspective of the storyteller like changed the story, because in the true story of the Three Little Pigs, the wolf was less of a villain, and then originally the pigs were like the victims in the situation, and they just thought the wolf was crazy. But then the wolf was just like, well, they're really crazy and they're really scared, and yeah. So that gives them an opportunity to talk about how perspective can change a story. And then I would also ask the students, this is like an opportunity to like talk about like morals and like social emotional learning. And I would ask students to talk amongst themselves and answer the question of what mistakes did the characters make, and how can they do better next time? And yeah. And so that would kind of be like the end of like discussion time in the lesson. And I would also give students an opportunity to share out after group discussion. And then like our final like activity or like form of assessment would be, I would have the students think of a story that they really liked. For example, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, which is typically told from Goldilocks. And I would want them to write one sentence describing the story from a different character's perspective. So you could tell it from like the bear's perspective. And so they could write like the little girl ate all my porridge and she was very rude. And then they could draw a picture of that situation happening. And so yeah, that's my lesson and that's my activity. So I hope you enjoy. All right, thank you.